The Zarketh were a species that considered themselves the pinnacle of galactic civilization. For centuries, they had explored the stars, expanding their influence with calculated precision. Their technology was unmatched, their ships the most advanced, and their understanding of the universe beyond comparison at least. That's what they believed. So when a transmission from an unremarkable planet called Earth arrived, claiming that humanity had made technological advancements that could change space travel forever, the Zarketh were skeptical. Humans were a young species, barely a footnote in the grand history of the cosmos. What could they possibly offer that the Zarketh did not already possess? Still, curiosity was a trait of the truly intelligent, and the Zarketh Council, after much deliberation, decided to send an envoy to investigate. A single warship, the Orcs' Pride, was dispatched to Earth, not as a gesture of trust, but as a reminder that the Zarketh were the dominant force in the galaxy. As the ship approached Earth, the Zarketh expected to find a primitive world barely scraping the surface of space travel. What they saw instead unsettled them. Orbital stations floated above the planet, and a network of satellites formed a sophisticated defense grid. The energy readings from the surface were unusual, fluctuating in ways that defied conventional engineering. The Zarketh captain, Varkos, ordered a deep scan, expecting to confirm that the readings were nothing more than anomalies caused by human ignorance. But the ship's sensors could not explain what they were detecting. There was power on Earth that should not exist, energy signatures that did not align with any known technology. Varkos frowned. This was not what they had expected. If the humans were deceiving them, it was a deception unlike any they had encountered before. Upon landing in a massive human-built structure, Varkos and his team were greeted with an unsettling confidence. The humans were not in awe of their visitors. They did not cower before the might of the Zarketh Empire. Instead, they smiled, spoke with ease, and welcomed them as equals. This was the first sign that something was different about this species. Most civilizations, upon first contact with the Zarketh, treated them with fear or overwhelming admiration. The humans did neither. Instead, they offered a tour of their facilities, guiding their guests through vast corridors filled with machinery that pulsed with an unfamiliar energy. The humans called it the breakthrough, but they refused to explain further, not yet. They wanted the Zarketh to see it for themselves. After hours of observing human technology, much of which was impressive but not beyond the capabilities of the Zarketh, the visitors were finally led to a restricted section deep beneath the surface. The air was thick with anticipation as they entered a massive underground chamber. And there, standing at the center of it all, was a ship unlike anything Varkos had ever seen. It was sleek, almost organic in design, its dark surface shimmering as though it were absorbing light rather than reflecting it. The ship gave off no detectable power signature, yet it floated above the ground effortlessly. There were no visible engines, no propulsion systems, nothing that aligned with conventional starship design. It simply existed, silent and waiting. Varkos felt an uncharacteristic sense of unease. This was not human engineering. This was something else entirely. One of the human scientists stepped forward, his expression filled with restrained excitement. "This," he said, gesturing to the ship, "is what we wanted you to see. We didn't build this. We found it." The words sent a ripple of tension through the Zarketh delegation. Found it? That was impossible. A ship of this complexity could not have simply been discovered on a world as young as Earth. The scientist continued, explaining how humanity had unearthed the vessel buried deep beneath the planet's surface. Its origin was unknown, its creators lost to time. But unlike other species who might have locked it away, fearing what they did not understand, humanity had done the unthinkable. They had reverse-engineered it, not through careful, methodical study, but through sheer recklessness, trial and error, and a level of ingenuity that bordered on madness. And it had worked. The ship was now active, partially understood but fully operational. Varkos felt a rare flicker of doubt. The Zarketh had always advanced through careful, deliberate progress, never taking risks beyond their understanding. It was their way, the way of a civilization that had maintained dominance for millennia. But these humans, they had taken something beyond their comprehension and made it their own. It was dangerous, unpredictable, and yet it was also brilliant. Varkos turned to his second-in-command, who was watching the ship with a mixture of awe and concern. "If this is true," Varkos murmured, "then humanity is far more dangerous than we ever imagined." The humans, unaware of the turmoil in the Zarkath's minds, continued explaining their findings. They spoke of materials that repaired themselves, an energy source that defied known physics, and a propulsion system that had no theoretical limit. They had not only scratched the surface of its capabilities, but even with their limited understanding, they had already surpassed technologies the Zarkath had spent thousands of years perfecting. The implications were staggering. If the humans had achieved this much in such a short time, what would they accomplish in the next decade? In the next century? Varkos clenched his jaw. The Zarkath had come to Earth expecting to find an insignificant race playing with scraps of technology they barely understood. Instead, they had found something far more unsettling, a species willing to take risks no one else dared to take. A species that had turned ignorance into strength. A species that, given enough time, could surpass even the great Zarkath Empire. And perhaps they already had. But even as the humans continued their explanations, something else was happening, something none of them had foreseen. Deep in the void of space, beyond the reach of human or Zarkath sensors, a signal pulsed outward from Earth, carried on waves of energy not bound by conventional physics. It was a beacon, an unintended message sent across the cosmos. And somewhere, in the darkness between the stars, something ancient stirred. Something that had been waiting. The humans had uncovered a secret they were never meant to find. And now, something was coming. Varkos did not know it yet, but this visit to Earth would change the fate of the galaxy forever. Varkos had never felt uncertainty before. The Zarkath were a species of logic, discipline, and careful advancement, their technological progress unfolding over millennia of calculated research. Yet, here on Earth, he had seen something that defied all logic, a starship that should not exist, powered by something no known science could explain. His mind kept returning to the human's words, "We did not build it. We found it." That single sentence had changed everything. If what they claimed was true, then humanity had gained access to something far beyond their natural level of advancement. And that made them a far greater threat than the Zarkath had ever imagined. As he stood before the silent, black-hulled ship, its surface seeming to shimmer as though aware of his presence, Varkos knew he needed answers. And he would not leave Earth until he had them. The human scientist, Dr. Elias Carter, observed the Zarkath delegation carefully, noting their silent expressions, their subtle reactions. He knew they were struggling to comprehend what they had seen. It was not arrogance that made him smile. It was the sheer satisfaction of watching a species that believed itself superior now forced to reconsider everything. "I know what you're thinking," Carter said, his voice calm but confident. "You believe we're lying. You think it's impossible for us to have discovered something so advanced and actually learned how to use it?" He took a few steps closer to the ship, running a hand along its smooth, alien surface. "But it's the truth. And the truth is often more terrifying than any lie." Varkos narrowed his eyes. He did not appreciate being spoken to as though he were a student learning a lesson. "Then explain it," he said, his voice cold and controlled. "How did your species accomplish what should be impossible? What is the true secret of Earth's progress?" Carter gestured for them to follow, leading them deeper into the underground facility. As they walked, the air grew heavier, the walls lined with complex machinery humming with power. The Zarkath could recognize some of the technology, but much of it was unfamiliar, built using materials and methods that made no sense even to their advanced knowledge. They reached a massive vault-like door, its surface covered in intricate patterns that glowed faintly as Carter entered a code. With a deep, mechanical hiss, the door slid open, revealing a cavernous chamber beyond. And at its center, encased in layers of protective shielding, was the source of everything. It was not the ship itself that had led to Earth's rapid progress. It was what had been found inside it. Suspended within a containment field was a small, pulsing sphere of energy, shifting colors in ways that defied natural patterns. The Zarketh had seen powerful reactors before, had harnessed energy sources beyond the reach of lesser civilizations. But this was different. The readings were erratic, the output immeasurable. It was not merely energy, it was something alive, something aware. This, Carter said, turning back to them, is what changed everything. Varkos and his officers studied the sphere with expressions of both fascination and unease. The energy radiating from it was unnatural, chaotic yet controlled. "What is it?" Varkos finally asked, though he already suspected that the answer would be more unsettling than he wanted to hear. Carter exhaled slowly. "To be honest, we don't know." He glanced at the sphere as if it were a dangerous beast that could wake at any moment. "When we first found the ship, it was dormant. Just a shell, no power, no systems active. We spent years trying to figure it out, but nothing worked. Then we discovered this buried deep within its core. The moment we removed it, the ship reactivated. It was as if we had awakened something that had been asleep for a very, very long time." He turned back to the Zarketh. "We don't know who made it. We don't know where it came from. But we do know one thing: this isn't just technology. It's something beyond technology." Varkos felt a deep discomfort settle in his chest. The Zarketh had always believed that science could explain everything, that every mystery, given enough time and study, could be unraveled. But as he looked at the shifting, pulsing entity before him, he was no longer certain. "And yet, you chose to experiment with it," he said, his voice carrying a tone of quiet disbelief. "You tampered with something you do not understand." Carter smirked. "Of course we did. That's what we do." It was then that Varkos truly understood the nature of humanity. The Zarketh were careful, methodical. They would have spent centuries analyzing, theorizing, running endless calculations before ever daring to touch something this dangerous. But humans? They had taken something beyond their comprehension and had simply used it. Not because they fully understood it, but because they were willing to risk everything for progress. And it had worked. That was what made them so dangerous: not their technology, not their intelligence, but their recklessness. The Zarketh officer beside Varkos shifted uneasily. "And what if it had destroyed you?" Carter shrugged. "Then we would have learned something valuable." There was a silence that stretched between them, filled only by the low hum of the containment field. The Zarketh delegation exchanged glances, realizing that they had severely underestimated this species. They had come to Earth expecting to find a civilization that had lucked into an advanced discovery, one that could be controlled, guided, perhaps even manipulated. Instead, they had found a species willing to take the kind of risks that no other sane civilization would dare. And worst of all, they had succeeded. Varkos turned his gaze back to the pulsing sphere, watching as its colors shifted, almost as if it were reacting to their presence. He did not know what it truly was. He did not know if it was a remnant of a lost civilization, a piece of forgotten technology, or something even older, something that had existed long before any known race had taken to the stars. But he did know one thing with absolute certainty: this was not the end of the mystery. It was only the beginning. As they turned to leave, alarms suddenly blared through the facility, red warning lights flashing across every corridor. The humans stiffened, their expressions darkening. Carter pressed a communicator to his ear, listening to a rapid string of reports before his face hardened. "We have a problem," he said grimly. "Something just entered the solar system, and it's headed straight for Earth." Varkos felt his stomach tighten. Had they been followed? Had something been watching, waiting for the moment when humanity would uncover secrets best left buried? A terrible realization settled over him. This was never just about humanity's progress. Whatever had been sleeping inside that ship had now sent out a signal, and something out there had heard it. Deep beneath the surface of Mars, hidden for thousands of years beneath layers of dust and rock, something stirred. It was not a machine in the way humans understood them, nor was it entirely alive. It had no name, no origin that could be traced. It had simply waited, buried in silence, until the moment came when it was needed again. And now, that moment had arrived. Dr. Helena Carter stood at the edge of the excavation site, staring down at the strange artifact half buried in the red soil. It was massive, almost 20 meters long, its surface covered in patterns that shimmered in the dim light of the underground cavern. No human had ever seen anything like it before. It was neither rock nor metal, and when they had first touched it, the readings had been impossible to understand. It was as if the artifact did not exist within the normal laws of physics. That alone was enough to send shivers down her spine. "This thing isn't natural," she muttered, more to herself than anyone else. "It shouldn't be here." Beside her, Colonel David Reeves crossed his arms, his expression unreadable. And yet, here it is. He glanced at the team of scientists working cautiously around the object, scanning its surface, running tests, trying to unlock its secrets. "Do we have any idea what it is?" Helena exhaled, shaking her head. "We tried carbon dating, but it doesn't respond to any of our methods. It could be 1,000 years old or 1,000,000. There's no way to tell." She placed a hand on the cold surface, feeling a strange hum beneath her fingertips. "But there's something else," she added in a hushed tone. "It's not completely inactive. There's a pulse. Like a heartbeat." Reeves stiffened. He had been on too many missions to take words like that lightly. "Are you saying it's alive?" I don't know." Helena withdrew her hand. "But it's aware of us. I can feel it." Before Reeves could respond, a sudden high-pitched alarm rang through the chamber. The scientists froze, their eyes darting toward the source of the noise. One of the computers monitoring the artifact flashed with strange, unreadable symbols. The readings on the screen spiked violently, as if the object had suddenly surged with energy. And then, without warning, the cavern trembled. The ground beneath them shook, dust and small rocks falling from the ceiling. "Everyone back," Reeves shouted, grabbing Helena's arm and pulling her away. The scientists scrambled for cover, eyes wide with panic as the artifact pulsed brighter, its patterns shifting, glowing with an eerie blue light. Then, in a single blinding flash, the cavern was filled with energy. The light faded just as quickly as it had appeared. When Helena opened her eyes, she felt the weight of something pressing on her mind, an invisible force that seemed to wrap around her thoughts. Around her, the others were stirring, groaning in confusion, blinking as they tried to comprehend what had just happened. But none of them spoke. None of them moved toward the artifact. Because something had changed. The patterns on its surface were no longer random, they had formed symbols, clear and precise. And then, for the first time in thousands of years, a voice echoed through the chamber. It was not spoken aloud, yet every single person heard it in their mind, a deep, resonant tone that carried the weight of ages. "I have awakened." A cold silence fell over the team. Helena's breathing was shallow, her pulse hammering in her ears. She looked at Reeves, and for the first time, she saw fear in his eyes. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He gave a slow nod. "Yeah," he muttered. Loud and clear. The artifact pulsed again, its glow intensifying, and suddenly data began pouring into the computers at an impossible speed. Rows upon rows of unknown symbols, equations, and schematics filled the screens. It was knowledge beyond anything humanity had ever encountered. But then, something even more terrifying happened. The cavern around them began to change. The walls shimmered, shifting as if reality itself was bending. And then the ground split open. A doorway appeared, carved from the very stone itself, leading into an abyss of darkness. And from within that darkness, something stirred. Helena felt her stomach drop as she realized the truth this relic had not just awakened. It had signaled something, and whatever had been waiting on the other end was now coming. Reeves grabbed his radio, his voice sharp with urgency. "Command, this is Colonel Reeves. We have a situation. The artifact is active. Repeat, the artifact is active." He paused, glancing at the yawning darkness before them. "And we are no longer alone." A low hum vibrated through the chamber, growing louder, deeper. The doorway pulsed with the same eerie glow as the artifact, and suddenly, the air felt heavier, charged with unseen energy. Helena clenched her fists. They had come to Mars looking for remnants of the past. The alarm screamed through the corridors of the research station, their sharp wails cutting through the thick, suffocating air. Red emergency lights flickered, casting eerie shadows along the steel walls. Dr. Alan Foster sprinted down the dimly lit hallway, his heart pounding in his chest. Behind him, the distant echoes of shouts and gunfire filled the air, growing closer with every passing second. He could hear the heavy thudding of boots, alien, mechanical, relentless. They were coming. And if he didn't make it to the escape shuttle in time, there would be no second chance. He clutched the data drive in his trembling hands, its contents worth more than his life. The secrets stored within had cost the lives of his entire team, but he had sworn to get it out, to make sure the world knew what had been discovered here. The station, hidden on the farthest moon of a distant gas giant, was supposed to be secure, protected by layers of secrecy. But something had gone terribly wrong. The experiment, something he had never fully understood, had drawn them here. And now, the only thing left to do was run. Turning a sharp corner, Alan nearly collided with Captain Sarah Connors, her face streaked with sweat and dirt. She grabbed his arm, pulling him forward. "We need to move. Now," she snapped, her voice barely audible over the chaos behind them. He didn't argue. They ran together, past broken consoles sparking with electricity, past bodies lying motionless on the cold floor. The station was dying, its structure groaning under the weight of whatever force had been unleashed. As they neared the docking bay, the doors ahead slammed shut with a deafening clang, the emergency lockdown sealing their last exit. Alan skidded to a halt, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "No, no, no," he muttered, his hands frantically pressing at the control panel. The screen blinked, access denied. "They've locked us in." Sarah gritted her teeth, yanking out her sidearm. "Then we blow it open." She aimed at the control panel and fired. Sparks flew, the metal casing melting under the intense heat, but the door remained stubbornly closed. Alan felt a crushing wave of despair. "That's not going to work," he said, voice shaking. "We need another way." A low, guttural sound echoed through the hallway behind them. It was not human. It was a warning. Alan turned slowly, dread coiling in his stomach. From the shadows, they emerged. Tall, skeletal figures, their exoskeletons gleaming under the red emergency lights. Their hollow, soulless eyes locked onto the two humans with eerie precision. The creatures moved with an unnatural grace, their elongated limbs flexing as they advanced. Alan could see the jagged weapons built into their arms, weapons that had already torn through the rest of the crew. Sarah grabbed his wrist. "We don't have time for this. There's another way out, the maintenance tunnels. But we have to go now." Alan hesitated for only a second before following her. They ran again, twisting through the station's narrow corridors, the creatures right behind them. The air was thick with the scent of burnt metal and blood, the station groaning as explosions rocked its foundations. The whole structure was coming apart. They reached the maintenance hatch, and Sarah pried it open, shoving Alan inside. "Go," she ordered, raising her weapon toward the approaching figures. Alan scrambled forward, crawling through the tight passageway, his lungs burning. Behind him, he heard Sarah fire once, twice before a terrible, wet sound silenced the gunfire. His blood ran cold, but he didn't dare stop. He couldn't. The tunnel was endless, twisting through the dying station like veins through a corpse. The distant hum of engines vibrated beneath him, a reminder that the escape shuttles were still docked. If he could just make it, if he could reach one before they caught up, then maybe, just maybe, he had a chance. Bursting out of the maintenance shaft, Alan landed hard on the cold metal floor of the hangar. His arms ached, his vision swam, but the sight before him forced his body into motion. The last shuttle, its engines already warming up, stood waiting. It was a miracle. He ran, each step feeling heavier than the last. The weight of everything, the loss, the fear, the suffocating knowledge that he was the only one left threatened to crush him. But he didn't stop. Behind him, the creatures poured into the hangar, their movements eerily silent despite their speed. Alan's legs screamed in protest, but he pushed forward, his fingers brushing against the shuttle's open door just as something cold and sharp sliced through the air behind him. A searing pain tore through his side, and he stumbled, collapsing into the shuttle with a choked gasp. He barely managed to slam his hand against the emergency close button before darkness began creeping into his vision. The last thing he saw as the doors sealed shut was the creatures standing just outside, watching him. Not attacking. The shuttle shuddered as it lifted off, the force pressing Alan back against the cold floor. His breath came in ragged, shallow gulps. He pressed a trembling hand to his wound, feeling the warmth of his own blood soaking through his suit. But it didn't matter. He was alive. He had escaped. The station shrank in the distance, its final explosion blooming like a dying star. Alan forced himself upright. The data drive was still clutched in his hand, its contents untouched. He had survived. And now he had a mission. The truth about what had happened here could never be buried, because whatever those creatures were, whatever had been awakened inside that station, it wasn't over. It was just beginning. The vast emptiness of space stretched endlessly before them, a dark ocean of stars and unknown dangers. Captain Daniel Hayes stood at the bridge of the Odyssey, staring at the shimmering anomaly on the holographic display. It was unlike anything they had ever encountered, a swirling mass of energy, a rift in space that defied all logic. The mission was simple: investigate, gather data, and return. But deep down, Hayes knew that nothing beyond the frontier was ever simple. The crew moved in tense silence, their eyes flicking between screens filled with unreadable data. Lieutenant Sarah Cole tapped furiously at the console, her brow furrowed. "Captain, the readings are unstable. The anomaly is shifting, growing stronger. If we get too close, we might not be able to pull back." Hayes exhaled, his fingers tightening around the armrest of his chair. The Odyssey was humanity's most advanced exploration vessel, built to survive the unknown. Yet, the unknown had a way of making even the strongest ships feel fragile. "We've come too far to turn back now," he said. "Take us closer. But keep the engines primed. If anything goes wrong, I want us ready to leave in an instant." The ship glided forward, the anomaly growing larger on the main screen. Colors twisted within it, hues beyond human understanding, shifting and folding like a living thing. A deep hum reverberated through the hull, as if the Odyssey itself was responding to the presence of something watching. Then, without warning, the ship lurched. The controls flickered, alarms blaring. The anomaly pulsed, and in an instant, the Odyssey was no longer where it had been. The black void of space had changed. The familiar constellations were gone, replaced by a dense nebula that crackled with strange energy. Hayes gripped the armrest, his pulse racing. "Report. What just happened?" Sarah's fingers danced over the controls, her voice tight with urgency. "We've been pulled through, Captain. The anomaly, it wasn't just a rift, it was a gateway. We're not in our sector anymore." A cold realization settled over the bridge. They had gone beyond the known frontier, into uncharted space where no human had ever set foot. And now, there was no clear way back. Hayes took a steadying breath. "Get me a full scan of the area. I want to know exactly where we are and what's out there." As the ship adjusted to its new surroundings, the sensors picked up something that made the blood drain from Sarah's face. "Captain, we're not alone." The screen flickered to life, displaying a massive structure in the distance, an enormous construct that defied explanation. It wasn't natural. It wasn't human. The surface of the structure pulsed with light, as if responding to their presence. And then, the worst happened. A signal. Not a distress call. Not a greeting. It was a warning. The ship's systems faltered, the engines sputtering as an invisible force gripped the Odyssey. Hayes felt the pull, a gravity that wasn't from any planet. It was drawing them in. Reverse thrusters. "Now!" he barked. The crew scrambled, but it was too late. The force dragged them forward, pulling them closer to the alien construct. The closer they got, the more they could see the intricate patterns etched into its surface, glowing symbols that seemed almost familiar. The ship trembled as it came to a stop inside what looked like a docking bay. Silence fell over the bridge, broken only by the ragged breaths of the crew. Then, a voice calm, emotionless, echoed through the speakers. It spoke in no known language, yet they understood every word. Welcome, travelers. You have entered forbidden space. You will not leave. A shiver ran down Hayes' spine. The crew exchanged uneasy glances. Who are you? He demanded. The voice did not answer. Instead, a door on the far end of the docking bay slid open. A figure emerged, humanoid but not human. Its eyes glowed with a soft blue light, its body encased in armor that shifted like liquid metal. It stopped just short of the ship, tilting its head as if studying them. Then it spoke again. Your kind was never meant to cross the veil. And now you must face the consequence. Hayes felt the weight of those words settle on his chest. They had ventured beyond them.